and welcome to B Shifter. John Vance, your host here today, Josh Blum and Chris Stewart. I almost said Stewart, which is our common thing that we say. Today we are going to be talking about natural gas emergencies and other flammable gas emergencies and the Blue Card policy that kind of helps to guide us and some of the tools that Blue Card has to prepare you for such emergencies in your jurisdiction. So first of all, just want to check in with you guys. How you doing?
Doing fantastic. Happy to be here. Always good to hang out at the AVB CTC.
And we've got another good week going here.
Busy week at the College of Knowledge.
So, it seems like we're seeing more incidents. I don't know if we are or if they're just more catastrophic, but what are some of the ways we need to prepare to go on these types of incidents? And then what tools do we apply that we have available to us through, especially the Blue Card users, to prepare our incident response? And we're going to talk about things really from an operations point of view, from an everyday response point of view, and that's the way I'm asking that question.
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of started. It seems like there's been an increase. So we launched Blue Card's All Hazards. We launched the hazmat IC module about 5 years ago now, and a big component of it was natural gas. We did it because we identified, hey, what are basically the big four incidents as far as hazmat response that fire departments go to. So natural gas was right at the top, next to really carbon monoxide emergencies, ahead of them a little bit. But, in our program, we talk about every year 300 plus natural gas or propane events that are catastrophic, where there's fatalities or civilian fatalities or injuries and big dollar loss, right? So,
some
those
kind
numbers.
of explosion, right?
Some kind
involved in that.
Yeah. Not just a fire, but some kind of explosion. So out of average, 10-year average from the National Pipeline Emergencies Work Group, about 300 incidents a year, 65 plus injuries on average, roughly 13 people killed, $475 million in loss and property loss. So, I mean, that's a lot of, significant events, and how many do we go to that we just got away with that were natural gas response or propane response? So it's important, I think, we talk about like all the critical factor pieces with it. So, Chris, you can jump in anytime, but there's a big difference between responding to a natural gas leak in the street or at a house or an apartment building or a commercial building or was a line hit by a construction company, because all of those things are really critical factors in our system of what's really going on there, what type of building is there, who's involved. Oftentimes when a pipe, when they're doing pipeline work, somebody might be there that actually knows quite a bit about the system, depending on, who's doing the work. If it's actually natural gas pipeline work happening, there's obviously somebody there that knows a lot about the system, but if it was an accidental thing, that's a little different. So it has to start with that. So our deployment has to be different for every one of those. So, far too often, the respond for odor or natural gas. Well, is it inside the building or outside the building? Two totally different things. And if it's inside the building, are the people getting out of the building? And that becomes down to the dispatch piece, right? So what can dispatch do to help us with that and gather information for us, before we're even getting there to the incident? So, Chris, I know you always have, a bit on the critical factor thing on that piece, like the building type and the information, where is it and what's the detail? So.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it, like many things, we talk about 300 incidents across the country, in the last few years on, average around numbers, right? That's roughly one a day around the nation. But there's thousands of gas leak emergency type calls going on in every jurisdiction across the country all year. So, and a serious number of those result in nothing, right? So we get sucked into a little bit of complacency and a little bit of, these are dumb, or nothing really happens on these. And we've gotten away with it so long, and accidental success a lot of times. And And really what we need to do is focus on the things that we've got in our SOGs, the things that we have in our standard strategic decision making and utilizing the functions of command in evaluating and recognizing truly the critical factors and how important of a critical factor not only the gas emergency potentially is, what type of leak it is, where it is, what type of structure, inside, outside, all those types of things, and connect that to our life safety potential here. Because a lot of times the difference really for us from like a normal fire ground is a lot of times the initial arriving companies don't have the ability to mitigate this emergency, right? So we can get there, identify what's going on, identify who it's impacting, what it's impacting, start to establish some hazards, a hazard zone, establish an area in which we're going to work, what's safe for us to be in, what isn't safe for us to be in, evacuate those people. It goes back to the whole evacuate, isolate, deny entry type stuff, and then set up these areas in which we should be working from. And knowing and recognizing based on, is it natural gas? Is it propane? Is it something else? And the significant differences between natural gas and propane, let's say, the two, what I think are probably the most common is one, the natural gas specific gravity lighter than air, and propane specific gravity greater than air. So it's going to sink and sit in low places, and so we can't have expect each one to behave like the other. So we've got to actually be smart, and that helps us establish our hazard zone and that whole front end evaluation thing. Because when we get in trouble on these, we have gotten a lot of times sucked into areas and in places and doing things that we probably shouldn't have prior to the technician folks arriving who are really going to mitigate this, and us working in what I'll say offensive positions during truly defensive conditions. So the Project Mayday data says that 10 or 9% actually of all Maydays between 2016 and 2021, roughly 9% were results of explosions of some kind. 73% of those that got dispatched, they knew it was some type of flammable gas leak from dispatch, right? So it wasn't like 3/4 of the time, it's not a mystery as to what we're going on, and yet we're still getting caught in positions where we're having maydays. So it's that evaluative process on the front end, figuring out those critical factors, recognizing what we should be doing based on our risk management plan, what strategy we should truly be in, and then connecting the appropriate action to all of those things in our strategic decision-making process.
Backing up the deployment, because I think that's a really good place to start. We're all over the place. I see some jurisdictions, one guy in a pickup truck for a gas leak. I see some jurisdictions where it's a full first alarm response. What should we be looking at? Is it different for propane versus natural gas on our response and deployment? What should we be sending to those calls for us to have a safe and effective response?
I mean, yeah, John, we see it, right? The one person in a pickup truck, and if you want to limit your exposure, that's a great way to do it, but you're taking a big risk if something happens, right? But, we've talked a lot about it, majority of large metropolitan areas that respond to a large number of gas leaks send a pretty heavy response to gas emergencies. And, we just talked recently about a couple of the incidents in D.C., right? And, it was all over national news, and that those first couple companies were doing everything right when they got there. They didn't pull in front of the building. They were staged off. It appeared to be a city block or 300 and something feet. And if you look at any of the response guides for response to natural gas or propane or whatever, I mean, it starts with a small leak at 100 meters, so that's 300 feet. So we can kind of judge that. So don't expose ourselves and put us right in front of what's going to happen. And, we can see the pictures from when an explosion does happen that, there's debris, sometimes 1,000 feet away. So, we talk about in the Blue Card program for hazmat response, specifically with natural gas, that really it's starting off defensive. And, we're going to start off at 300 feet plus, and we're going to start monitoring right away at the apparatus. And then we're going to approach that area. And, Chris said it, we probably say it 100 times in the program, isolate and evacuate. And if you can control, the flow, if possible, with a meter or, a valve, because it's right there in your face, shut it off. Because it's not a technician level response. It's really like an operations level hazmat response. I mean, we're not bending over lines and putting special tools typically as the fire department. Some places are doing that. They have some specialized training or whatever, but we're not doing that. So when it comes to deployment, the deployment has to match the potential work that's going to take place. And if we're going to put on our turnout gear and put a mask on, then we need to have things in place to address that. And if something happens to the first company, we want to be able to address that something did happen to them. And we want to limit our exposure still and only have that one company, into the hazard zone. Because really we're treating it like a hazmat incident. There's a whole lot of unknowns with natural gas. Because if there's a natural gas leak somewhere, there is the perfect mixture. So, I think there's more for us to learn and study in our industry, nationwide about this, and we can learn best practice from a lot of these people who are very successful responding to thousands of natural gas events, not with accidental success, but the DC model, right? I mean, it blew up. They realized what happened. Then they were able to take action, and thank God they didn't pull right in front of the building. And I think it was just a month before that we saw the Fort Worth event, right? The explosion in Fort Worth, and the fire department got called to that as an explosion. But I got some footage from somebody who was there in the area when that happened, and it was like, don't be in front of that. So it comes down to, you got to be doing everything right when something goes wrong, and we get caught so much because we're fixers. And we got called to the natural gas leak, and it ended up being the stove that somebody left the knob on, whatever, and we shut it off. And it's like, okay, it was no big deal. Well, nothing's a big deal until it is, right? So it comes back to the critical factors. We have to evaluate the critical factors, which to me starts with, we park this far away, we wear all of our gear appropriately, we send the proper response, people stage, in a certain direction, somebody's on a water supply if need be. Life safety is a huge part of it, including our own. So isolate and evacuate. Call the utility company because they're the professionals. Something about the utility company that resonates with me every time we talk about natural gas. So Duke Energy in Ohio, which is, I think, connected to 30% of the gas distributors in the United States, affiliate somehow or another. They all, Ohio, Kentucky, North Carolina, whatever, they're all connected. We were wanting to get some of their folks on video and talking head stuff, and they were like, no, you're the fire department. How about you go there and isolate and evacuate, and you call us, and then we'll fix it. And we were told by their director of safety, who was way up in the organization, you touch it, you bought it. And it's like, well, that was a thing. So, I mean, that's in our program, because I remember early on, we would throw a wet towel across the yellow pipe and put a pair of vice grips on it and crimp it off. And now it's like, no, it's not our thing, right? I mean, we don't own that. We don't know what it's going to do, when we do that. And in this case, what our objectives is life safety, right? And then limit exposure. And that's what we're doing, is we're evacuating, isolating, which is limiting exposure. And utility company can get there and they're going to mitigate it, from that point forward, which really lines right up with how we respond to lots of hazmat incidents.
And so I think organizations need to look at the deployment process and what they're sending based on the work that needs to happen. And so I'll say, first and foremost, and in my experience, the vast majority of these need some level of strategic IC responding. They need task and tactical level folks that are actually going to be able to do the work. And there needs to be technician level folks responding. And whether they're actually going to do something or not, doesn't matter. You get them responding and get them into the system early. And for us, at least in the system I grew up in, they were the connection point to the partners, for us it was Southwest Gas, right? To the folks that are actually managing that, or Arizona Propane, or whoever the propane provider is that we dealt with the most. And so you've not only have strategic technical task level coming from the fire department to be able to manage this from the beginning and hopefully making good decisions, but then connecting directly to the partners as soon as we possibly can, because we want to compress that time frame when we actually have an emergent situation or have the potential for that gas mixture to find the right combination so that we do have a problem. And so the recognition of in the hazmat world, our hazmat guys, gas leaks were the man down call of the hazmat world, right? Because they went on so many of them. And then so figuring out and tailoring the right level of response based upon some of the stuff Josh said earlier is inside or outside. If it's inside, is it a home? Is it multifamily? Is it a more industrial setting? Is it a hospital? The public assembly type places. And then so our response is scaled from very simple one engine company, one hazmat technician company, and a battalion chief to 3 engines, a truck company, and 3 hazmat companies, and 3 or 4 battalion chiefs. So it depends, and organizations need to kind of walk through that on the front end so that when they get the information and then allow the dispatchers to begin that size up process, that they're punching out the right resources in the beginning, and I guess the old adage is true: is if you don't need them, send them home. That's pretty good.
So then we get the situation evaluation where we're looking at what is it that we have, when should we never be going into an atmosphere versus going into, my question is like shutting the oven off. Are we okay to do that, or do we control it at the meter and then call the company to come in and control what's inside the house? What's really, and when I say the company, the public utility, what's really the best practice on that?
So, we start monitoring, with a 4 or 5 gas meter, whatever you're using. And then, I think best practice is running 1 or 2 of those meters right next to each other with a combustible gas meter. And, whatever that device is that your organization chooses. And we start that far away so that was this a gas leak outside that's getting inside, or is it inside and now it's coming outside? So, those are all things that you have to think about and are critical factors that help us evaluate what's going on. And, then we're talking to that responsible party. If you're at a house, like what is going on? What do you have, if in your home that is natural gas? A big telltale sign is if your natural gas meter's outside and that dial's going crazy, it's like, oh, what's going on with that? Which is becoming a challenge now because you don't see that because of electronic meters, and it's all just connecting to Wi-Fi or whatever. So there's just a valve that the utility company can control electronically, too, just like they do all the electric, components with electric lines. But so a lot of things I think we can tell with that. The absolutely positively we're stopping and we're doing nothing. Your meter goes off 10% LEO, and depending on what you have it calibrated with, it really doesn't matter. If your meter goes off, that's 10% of the LEL, right? So if the LEL is 2.1, well, it's only 10% of the 2.1 of that LEL number, right? Which we're not getting into. This isn't a hazmat class. We're not getting into all of that, but that's that sign of, okay, that's enough that we're not going to stay here, right? That's the same thing that lines up with confined space and anywhere else that we're going to work. That if the meter's calibrated and you're following NIOSH recommendations at 10% of the LEL, the meter's going to start going off. So that's the absolute, okay, we're going to go back until there's no gas present. And where there is gas present, it's the hot zone, right? And then beyond that, we create a warm zone, then a cold zone. So, if I'm getting into the house, I open the door and I take a second and I monitor there, right? Because we have to understand how our equipment works too, that it's not going to go off. It's not going to do something right now. Well, I'm 10 feet inside the house and all of a sudden it starts going off. Well, I probably had a reading at the front door too. So, it's that slow, methodical approach to monitoring, which is a whole task level thing. But in our system, we talk so much about task, tactical, strategic level. You have to connect all of them together. And the strategic IC, Chris is in the car. Well, he can't tell the task level guy, what he's doing with that. They have to do their job, with that piece of it. So if we're not getting a reading and we have an odor, there's a pretty good chance it might be the stove or whatever. But if you're getting a reading, it's likely not a malfunction or a knob is turned on something. There's probably something broken. The furnace had a complete failure of some component, or the natural or the dryer or hot water. Something has like failed typically, or there's a gas leak outside that is coming into the home, which we get that, which is why it's so important to start monitoring outside. And some ways that you can figure that out is natural gas rises, so it's pretty simple. If you start monitoring some sewer lids going down the street, you can kind of start to figure out, was this outside or inside. It never hurts to do a 360 around the building and do a little monitoring, like where's it coming from. I mean, if we're talking about, Chris and I were just having a discussion in his place where he's at now, no natural gas, all exterior propane tanks. They do have basements, right? And that's a big change from your response in the Phoenix area, right? So
I wake up at night thinking about that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it keeps you up, right? So that's just another piece of it. So to answer your question is, if you're getting a reading on your meter, no matter what, we're going to isolate and evacuate the people from the immediate space. If I get to 10% and I'm at a house, we're evacuating that house, which we were going to do anyway, and then we're going to start to go to those two other exposures and isolate them. If you can shut the gas meter off, if you get a reading and you just shut the gas meter off on the outside, then so be it, and hopefully you solved, the problem. I wouldn't go out of my way. If your meter's going off at 10%, I would not go out of my way to try to shut the gas meter off if it wasn't readily available. I mean, if I had to go into the basement or search inside of the building for it, I'm not doing that. So, I mean, there's a ton of variables to it, right? So I think the takeaway at the end of this, and we're maybe in the middle right now, is there's a ton of variables, a ton of critical factors. We have to think. None of them are the same. We can't treat every natural gas run like the last 10 that we went on that turned out to be not much of nothing, or was the gas coming from a stove, or they overpressurized the system, so something burped and somebody's HVAC system sucked a little gas into the building. We just had that in our region, like 25 gas runs in 5 minutes on the same street, and it's like, the system got overpressurized. It burped just like it's supposed to with a line on a major roadway. It's outside. It was cold out. The HVAC system's running everywhere, and it just sucked it in. And it's like, you're going to smell natural gas for a second, but not one reading anywhere. So, but that starts to create that mindset of, oh, these are all nothing. And it's like, well, that's where we get ourselves into trouble. And
I think the what do we do in the beginning has to be, we're assessing the problem and the threat, if you will, in the way Josh is talking about. And it's got to be connected to is life safety a critical factor or isn't it? Do I need to get in there and evacuate people that are either in what I think is the hazard zone or potentially the warm zone and get them out? And then at that point, okay, we're no longer going to go in there. We're going to truly make that the hazard zone, and nobody's going back in that area. So there may be a time when we're functioning in the hot zone with full PPE, breathing air, doing everything we're supposed to in order to get that all clear, to remove the life safety problem, and then take a very pessimistic defensive approach and be generous with our hazard zones.
When we're in a defensive strategy, say we go in, we clear any life safety problem, we evacuate, we isolate, then at what point do we start securing water supplies, getting lines out for standby if we believe we have a significant leak on an interior of a building, regardless of the type of structure it is, commercial or residential? When do we start setting ourselves up for a potential firefight? And I've had everything. I used to have a fire chief that when we would send a squad on a gas leak, his claim is all natural gas explosions blow themselves out. Well, I've been on a couple where they don't. I know that. And I also know that you can have a massive ignition source from it. So what do we start to do on the outside, and not just setting out lines and securing water supplies? What other things do we do from a warm zone perspective to safe the scene?
Yeah, so I mean, I think making sure that you keep that area isolated, right? You continue to monitor. You make sure that wherever the warm zone is, where the fire companies are working or staged, that you don't have a reading, and then keeping everybody else into the cold zone. And if we're into that point of it, then our entire the entire hot zone, right, goes all the way to wherever we don't have a reading. So, I mean, if that means we're evacuating 15 houses, that's what it means. If it means that it's last January, 17 below zero, 150 apartments in a 4-story center hallway apartment building, and they walked through the door and the meter started going off, and they were like, we got to evacuate this whole thing. And it's like, well, yeah, we're going to call the Metro bus service, and we're going to have to get these people, 4 blocks away from here. Mm-hmm. And, and that ended up being a 2-inch line that came into the building that severed at the wall. And it was quite a while before the energy company was even able to control that, because they were tracking back all through this apartment complex. It was before the meter. I mean, it was a mess, right? So that's a whole nother set of critical factors. So you want to talk about how many resources do you need? Well, when you get there, you got to make some decisions like, oh, I'm at a 4-story apartment building with all these apartments and it's cold outside, and I have a reading where I'm going to evacuate the entire thing. Well, that's a whole nother set of factors, right? So as far as starting to like actually hook up water supplies and put hand lines on the ground, I think we keep ourselves in that level 1, like staged location. And we really don't do that unless there was an explosion. Then we're going to get water supplies and start to set ourselves up for, okay, there was an explosion, which means that thing still, like you said, blew the fire out potentially or likely. That means we still got a gas leak, a bigger gas leak probably, right? So we could have a bigger event. So one thing is I don't like putting any companies in the position of tying themselves to a fire hydrant when they could be putting themselves in the hot zone and not be able to get out of that position very quickly. And I mean, we can always walk away from it, right? But unless we have an absolute reason to be on a water supply with hand lines on the ground, which would be, I think there was an explosion and now these exposures have some fire, or there's some fire on the ground, or, whatever. We're really not doing that. But what we are doing is we're in the mindset of companies or engines are level 1 stage, which means they're on a fire hydrant and hopefully coming from, different angles. So one of the things with the program is when you run a simulation, so we have a simulation that is a gas leak. You get inside and there's 10% LEL and you got to evacuate, a pretty significant area of homes. So what's that really look like? How many people does it take? How many people do you expose to do that? And then how do you keep them out of there? And then we have a track hoe incident where a track hoe hit a gas line. There's a fire, but it's not really exposing anything, but the track hoe is going to burn up regardless, right? Don't put it out, because now we just created a whole nother problem for ourselves. And then, natural gas simulation number 3 is there was a building that did explode. It's on the ground. There's some fire around it, but the exposures do have some fire. And then, further out, we have to get into those spaces, all of those spaces for life safety, right? And then start to set up our isolation. Like, how are we going to isolate this area? So we should always be ready with water, anchoring ourselves, if you will, into the potential hazard zone on natural gas response. There should be a good reason to do that if you're going to do that.
Yeah, and I think so we're talking about, our potential or our ability to mitigate a problem or the consequences of a problem like the explosion. So sometimes it's a guess. If we're hooking up lines and we want to be prepared to flow water, we might not even be really sure exactly where the leak is and that type of stuff. So it can potentially be problematic for us. The times I've got the most experience with us hooking water up and actually putting firefighters on hand lines is when the gas company shows up and they're going to go in the hole, or they're going to go to wherever the leak is and actually mitigate it. And we're there for their protection. And we had an incident in Phoenix in the late 90s where we blew up a sports shoe place. We had fire companies there in the middle of the night. They were actually on hand lines while the crew was down in the hole. That leak found an ignition spot, and then it blew up, and there's tennis shoes for 5 blocks in every direction. And we had fire companies there, right? And so it wasn't, we didn't necessarily foresee that happening there. So we've got to be really smart about when we're in those positions and understand and recognize the potential for it. Because that hand line during the explosion really ended up doing absolutely nothing to decrease the potential or the opportunity for that explosion to happen.
Another part of incident action planning then, say the public utility company gets there, they get things shut off. They want us to stand by. That's a request often. At what point do we help them ventilate? If they're requesting ventilation, or at what time do we initiate ventilation, or we're still just monitoring and waiting for the under 10% LEL? That's always been another confusing thing to me. It's like, what point do we try to ventilate this building?
Yeah, so everything from a house to the center hallway apartment to a 600 by 600 commercial building that a main supply line going into it broke on. And in every one of those circumstances, when we felt coordinating with the experts that it was time to ventilate, our ventilation was natural ventilation. And we just did that the best we could without putting any equipment into place, right? And I mean, with natural gas, oftentimes you can evacuate, ventilate natural gas relatively quickly once the leak has been shut off, just because it's gonna float away, right? It wants to rise, and then with propane it becomes a problem because of a basement and getting into void spaces. So on the flip of that, I guess with the natural gas thing, and we talk about it, is natural gas is going to go to the top. So in our world, getting natural gas leaks in the basement, it's like, well, we can't really find much in the basement, but there's a lot on the second floor. Well, you better check the attic, because that's where it's just waiting. It's just waiting for something, right? And we've seen plenty of roofs blow off that who knows what the reading was, but the firemen weren't in there anymore, thankfully, but there was an event while the fire department was still there. So having an understanding of, again, the critical factor piece, right? Propane is going to be in the basement or down in the sewer system, and natural gas is going to, float and go up and get into the attic spaces, go higher or whatever. Back to it, right? The critical factors, making decisions. Like, what are we really dealing with here? You're going to get called to a natural gas leak. Well, is it natural gas or is it propane? That comes back to the pre-plan thing, right, Chris? I mean, if you get called a natural gas leak and you're where you're at now, it's like, well, no, it ain't, because we don't have any. It's propane, right? And so what does that mean? So
yeah. So, and my experience working with our partners is that we need to establish a relationship before the call. Like, we need to know and understand. We probably need to train to at least some regular basis together, because there has been a time and a place where we show up and the experts, the people that are supposed to do this, aren't previously. They're not wearing the PPE that they're supposed to. They're not doing some of the things that they need to. And so since we're the people there that are supposed to protect them and back them up, we've got to sit down and go, no. We're going to do it to this degree. We're going to do it the way we've said we were going to do it, following your policies and our policies to make sure that happens, because they don't get to take excessive risk in this, just like we don't get to take excessive risk.
So when it comes to propane, one of these skills that we trained on for a long time was the ignited propane. The propane tree they bring out, they ignite it, and then you come in with 2 teams on a fog nozzle, the guy in the middle that's going to turn it off. Is that something that I've practiced it a lot? You're coming from a jurisdiction that has a lot of propane. Is that an actual practice? And if so, when?
I have zero experience at doing it in the real world. I can't say I've seen it. Can't say I've heard of an incident in and around me where it actually happened. I think there probably is a time and a place with it venting and or when it's venting and burning like that, and you're trying to keep the tank or the container cool, but somebody has to get in there to shut it off. I think there's a time and place. I can't say that it happens very often enough to where we need to initiate that, or it can't be shut off in another way from a remote location or something like that. So yes, we all have practiced that dance of advancing those two hose lines up there, but I can't say I've ever seen it, done it, or been around it for real.
So we see some of our users that connect with our system. Winston-Salem of North Carolina Fire Department. I mean, they're hazmat technician specialists, specialized train. Yeah, I mean, they post it on social media. You see them doing the full scale exercise of either that or actually just burning off propane.
Flare off operations. Yeah,
right. Mm-hmm. But that is not the everyday fire department. We showed up on an engine, and I just like going to fires, and that is a very special skill set, right? And that would only happen if we have those people available, right? So it comes back to the deployment. What can we really do with the resources we have available? And I mean, you could talk about the propane thing all the way down to a 20-pound propane gas grill on fire, right? I mean, the propane gas grill, John, you've made 100 of them. Mm-hmm. Propane gas grills on fire on the back porch. It's because
they throw them in the pool around here.
The gas line burned off, whatever. It's running up the back of the house, and we kind of just cool that. And if we can shut the tank off, it's gonna help us out, right? Well, it's still it's a big risk in what it is, but I mean that's an operational thing. I can figure that out and do that. I can put a fog stream on it. I can shut that valve off because I can just see that the hose, burnt through or hot grease dripped on the whatever it is, right? But that's not a 250-pound cylinder or a 500-pound. You're getting into a different place, right? So organizationally, you have to decide what skill set do your task level workers have and what's available as far as specialized operations, which we talk so much about. And like Chris said, the metro cities send hazmat tech units to you go to a carbon monoxide incident in a high-rise building, you're getting a specialized hazmat tech unit, right? And so, I mean, that's all over the place. So what do you have available? One of the reasons they do it is because they're right there. They're available. Let's get them coming here. And if we don't need them, we'll send them back. But we have somebody that's got a little bit more of a skill set, knowledge, monitoring, all of those things. So, it all comes down to what are your capabilities in decision making? Because you can't do the work if you don't have the people to do the work, and don't try to do the work if you don't have the people to do the work.
Knowledge, skills, and abilities. We need the number of people to do the work, and then if we're going to engage in something that's specialized, knowledge, skills, ability to actually be able to do what it is, the mitigation part that we're talking about, that not many of us actually possess to be able to do that.
How about these, just to switch gears a little bit, because we've been talking about fixed facilities, but transportation emergencies. So whether they're tankers or vehicles that are natural gas powered with pressurized natural gas powering the vehicle, cylinders that are being hauled, how do we approach those? Are they any different in our approach, in particular if they're on fire?
That goes back to the knowledge, skill, ability thing, right? So we have Rumpke Garbage by us, and they got CNG trucks every day of the week running up and down the road. And now we have, it's all across the country. UPS is using compressed natural gas.
Every city bus
tractor trailers
in the city of Phoenix.
So, I mean, that comes down to like the knowledge, skill, ability. Like, what's going on here? Why is this thing acting the way that it is? And we see it, right? I mean, it's blowtorching a couple 100 feet down the road. We've seen it, especially in Europe and France and some other places. We've seen some videos from some of those places. Like, holy shit! Like, don't be standing in front of that. It's going to kill anything in its path. And that comes down to how do you control it? How do you shut it off? Having the relationship for us with Rumpke Trash, having a relationship with the Metro bus service on. Bring that bus out here. Let's talk about it. How does it work? do your drivers know that if there is a problem that they can kill it with this push the red button and it's going to shut it off, right? So, and that's the future. I mean, alternative energy sources, propane, compressed natural gas, Rumpke, the methane that comes off of Mount Rumpke, as we call it. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, you can see them at any time flaring, burning off there, right? Chris, you've been there, and it was a big hole, and now it's a mountain. It's like, well, they're going to use that. They're going to use that because they're making it from garbage. So, I know people are tired of hearing it, but it all comes back to the critical factors. We have to make decisions.
We can't get tired of saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I think of those poor cats in LA City, right? They show up on that truck. It's a truck fire. It's got I think it was a natural gas propelled truck. And so when it's burning, we've definitely got to put water on it. We need to be really careful and considerate about how we're going to do that. And can we do that from safe distances? Can we do that with unmanned streams? Can we do that and put us at least in the best possible position to be protected if something explodes like it did there? And thank goodness those guys survived. Is all right. Can we do that? How can we do that differently when we have it? Because we're all going to end up going on that. So is our ability to put water on it, cool it, that type of stuff, and keep us farther at a distance away and let it do what it's going to do. We'll do the best we can to slow it down or keep it from happening. But let's try not to be up close and personal.
Yeah, there's from what I read, not just with that incident, but any incident like that, isn't there some kind of like fine line you have to walk between preventing the levee from happening versus occluding the relief valve that is probably off-gassing already, but if we put water on that, especially with CNG, isn't there a threat of that freezing then and then holding the gas in? Then we have even more pressure and more of a problem, which may have happened in LA. I don't know, but
yeah, and trying to be smart about where you're putting your water. Are you putting your water on things that you're trying, the exposures, if you will, the rest of the truck, you're trying to keep that from burning? Or are we actually trying to put water on the containers to keep them cool? And it's hard sometimes to decide or to be able to manage exactly where our water's going as soon as it leaves the line. We're trying to get it there and to that. And if there's a risk of our water creating damage, then we need to reconsider that or creating a problem that's going to cause explosions.
Just talk briefly about, Chris, I know you got experience with this. So we're at a building on fire and we realize that a gas line has now failed, right? So we've both been to incidents where we did not realize maybe exactly what was going on, and we unintentionally put the gas fire out, and we created a bigger problem, right? So, that comes back to that training everybody on every level and understanding like what's really going on here, and that I'm going to put water on this building, but I'm going to let that thing keep burning off because the last thing I want to do is fill this thing full of natural gas, and then I made a bomb, basically, right? So that's just another piece of it, and it wasn't really a big topic for us today, but I mean, we're going to those events and we see that, and the safest thing at that point is let that burn off. If I can shut the gas meter off, great, but oftentimes that line is on the outside and it burned through. So
and it's a recognition of oftentimes you can distinguish flammable gas coming out under pressure that's burning compared to all the other fuels in around it. And then if you do see that, recognizing that, managing where you're putting your water. So some recognition and training for young firefighters, young, older, or old firefighters, I guess it doesn't matter, is all right, there can be a sound difference, there can be a visual difference, and then what is it that we should or shouldn't do? Because putting it out tends to be bad for us. We burn down a Safeway because we put out a gas leak fire, and then it created a much more hazardous situation for us that we then could not control.
You guys have time to hang out and do a timeless tactical truth?
Always time.
All right, let's do it. Alan Bernstein Timeless Tactical Truths. Today, our Timeless Tactical Truth from the Chief is you can't save anyone when you are a victim. Boy, that is apropos to this discussion. You can't save anyone when you are a victim. Mm-hmm. How does that tie into the topic today?
This might take longer than the natural gas conversation.
Yeah, John, I can't start with that at the event. I have to start with you better be doing everything right when you got into that fire truck and put your seatbelt on, and you better not drive like an idiot and don't blow red lights, and you have to get there to make a difference, right? They called us, and it's an emergency, but it shouldn't be an emergency for us. It was an emergency for them. So, it starts with that. And for me, it comes down to doing everything. You got to be doing everything right all the time. And, we're going to make mistakes, but there's a difference between making mistakes and just being stupid and just doing what you want because you got away with it. And, for what we're talking about today, to jump right to the natural gas thing, if we pull up right in front of the building and it blows up, every bit of focus on the fire department response, and we can look at video after video after video, and we can talk to our friends and colleagues about it. When something happens to the firefighters, mayday, 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 whatever it is, that's where the focus goes. Whether I'm at a natural gas leak or I was cutting a hole in the roof and I fell partially through, and the next video clip shows 20 plus firemen trying to pull somebody out, right? We're going to save our own. I mean, that's what we're going to do. But the reason they called us is our big objectives, right? Life, safety, and put the fire out. Or, for natural gas, they called us, and it's life safety. We're going to isolate and evacuate, and we're going to try to help to conserve and save their property by controlling the utility if we possibly can. But we're going to call the appropriate people to help with it. So, Chris, I think you're right. I'm not going to say much more, if any more, because this is a series, I think.
Yeah. This goes to the term professionalism, right? So, and then you'll hear a lot of conversations, across the fire service and all the places those conversations happen now about what the communities want from us, what the customer wants from us, and they want us to be professional. They want us to show up and have a clue, and they want us to act appropriately and do the right things to save them or their stuff. Well, if we get screwed up in that process, it always takes away from being able to do any of those things. Every single time, it will take away from that. So we have to be really, really good at our job, and we have to be good at keeping ourselves out of trouble, because it's the only way we can devote 100% attention to actually fixing the problem that Mrs. Smith called us for. One of my earlier recollections on the job is an engine company getting in an accident, going to a fire call, and the fire chief asking, if you guys don't get there, can you do your job? And they're honestly like, yeah, no, we can't. All right, point very well taken, right? And so that's, to me, if we're not at our best and we're not doing our job and we're not keeping ourselves out of trouble, then we are taking away from taking care of Mrs. Smith.
Well, excellent discussion. Thanks so much, guys. As always, it's great to see you. Great to hang out. If someone wants to get more resources from Blue Card on natural gas emergencies, on propane emergencies, where do they go? Where can we send them to, Josh?
Yeah, so I mean, anybody that's a Blue Card user, all 50,000 plus of them right now have access to it online. Every Blue Card instructor, 4,000 plus instructors currently have it in the download center. Actually, all of the hazmat response, all of our SOGs are in there. And then it's always in the show notes, right? And we're always available. John, they can send it to you, me, Chris, anybody, right? And we will send them a Word document that they can adjust and refine and do with, what they want to do with it. So,
all right, we've got it for you. Look at those show notes. Not only do we have links to contacting us, we also have the Hazard Zone Conference coming up. Early bird pricing still in effect. So get online and get that. It's probably the most affordable, chock full of content training you can get out there. So we're going to be back in Cincinnati starting on September 30th with an expanded roster this year with some added workshops, plus the main thrust of the the conference later in the week. So we've got a lot of stuff going on there. Until next time.
Yeah, they can check it out. I mean, it's in the show notes, hazardzonebc.com. There's 26 different presenters. This year, we're going to have Dan, FSRI, Mandrikowski doing about an
Everything?
hour. About an hour and 45-minute or so discussion on really just the state of what we're seeing with the fire service of rapid fire growth. Specifically talking about lithium-ion batteries. Shane Ray is going to be back, our partner with the NFPA, talking about sprinklers and big box fires and what that really means. Chief Lieb's coming back to do a general session on kind of like, for most of the world, high-risk, low-frequency stuff. Not for them so much, but mid-rise, high-rise fires. But just talking about that. What does that really look like, and what's it take? And then we have 20 plus other, classroom sessions over that 2-day period. We're doing the May Day workshop the 2 days before the conference, and then we're offering a 3-day cert lab. And every day, more and more people are signing up. So we're looking forward to it.
All right. And not to make this a million plugs, but also in the show notes, don't FAFO. We have that t-shirt available too. So you can check that out as well. We got to go. See you next time on B Shifter.